Hello. Welcome to the second episode of the Nour Hadidi podcast, where I had the best time talking to Ethan Stanislawski, my first ever guest on the pod, about his incredible one-man show. Ethan is a comedian and writer based in LA, and it was a conversation where we were both open, honest, vulnerable. We connected. Ethan is now a friend for life, even though I've only ever hung out with him twice. And it just meant a lot. And I don't think we could have had that without his openness and vulnerability and his strength, really. So without further ado, please enjoy my very first guest and me.
It's a blistering battle for the most fundamental human rights that every living soul on this planet should inherit by birthright.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome back to the podcast. If you've watched our mini pilot episode that we put out, thank you for listening. We love it. We appreciate it. My name is Nour, and I'm so excited to introduce our guest today. Our guest is Ethan Stanislawski. I hope I said that right.
It's Ethan Stanislawski.
Ethan Stanislawski. There you go.
Thank you.
Yes. No, thank you. Ethan is a writer. He's a comedian. He's a storyteller. He's a performer. He is based in LA, but he's originally from New York. And he's had a 4-year run with his sketch team Night Church at the Pack Theater in LA. He was a writer for the CBS Diversity Showcase. And he's also had his sharp cultural commentary appearing in publications like NPR, The Village Voice, and the Chicago Maroon. You can find him on his Patreon. So go look him up right now. Give him money because he's an artist and we need it. And most recently, Ethan premiered his solo show, Jew Interrupted, and he's going to be performing it again this June at the Hollywood Fringe Festival. The show delves into his Jewish upbringing, exploring themes of religious trauma, grief, and identity with raw honesty and dark humor. Welcome to the show, Ethan!
Thank you so much, Nour, for having me. It's wild that, like, this is literally my second day in Toronto, and I'm already recording a podcast, like, ever in Toronto. So
oh, my
it's
gosh.
Wild. Yeah.
And I saw you on your first day, too.
You saw me on my first day within, like, 15 hours of me being in the city.
Yeah, you're not allowed to spend a day in Toronto without seeing me. That's
okay.
The rule.
Okay, that's not creepy. That's cool.
I'm just your,
you're my guy. I don't know if I should say Sherpa, but
yeah, sure.
You're my guide through the city. And
exactly.
You've been so helpful already.
Skip this station, you'll detect small smells of piss on this station. Please ignore.
Yeah.
Welcome to Toronto.
Yeah, I'm also from New York and live in LA, so like whenever I see shit on the street in LA, I'm like, oh, it reminds me of home. I get homesick a little bit. Yeah.
Well, you're gonna fit right in.
Yeah.
How has Toronto been in the very few days that you've been here?
It's been great. I'm getting a feel for it. My dad's from Montreal, and so I have spent a lot of time in Montreal. I have family in Ottawa and Vancouver, and I've spent time there. I've even been in Hamilton for some godforsaken reason, but never been in Toronto until these past 48 hours. It's wild. I don't know how I didn't get to make it here until this age.
Yeah, you were you were saving the best for last.
Probably. Yeah.
And how would you rank it amongst all the other Canadian cities you've been at?
It's pretty great so far. It's a small sample size, but it has been pretty. I've had a wonderful time here, and I've done a little bit of touristy stuff today. I've done a little bit of local stuff today, and just a lot of walking. So if you're watching the video and I'm sweaty, that's why. It's an unseasonably hot day here.
It is very hot today. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
We actually met yesterday at a documentary screening, Coexistence My Ass, where you were looking for a seat with your wife and I yelled your name out. Yeah. I was like,
where's Nour gonna be? It's a big theater and you were right there as we were walking in, so it was perfect.
It was packed. We had to go upstairs for seats.
I love the name Hot Docs for a theater, by the way. It makes me hungry, but but it's fantastic. It was a great theater and there was that festival going on. I was talking with my wife and we were just like, this would not be filled out in LA. So it was.
Why not?
It's just like people go to. Part of it's like, oh, I got to support another friend's thing or like that kind of thing. It's just. or people, I don't know. There's something like, and maybe I was biased because just like that documentary hit me so hard. Like I think it did just about everyone in the theater. I was in the bathroom afterwards and people were wiping tears away.
Really?
Like so many people were wiping tears away. It was a beautiful film. And it was literally like the first thing at cultural activity I did in Toronto. And it was just a really moving, incredible experience. And it hit me so hard, like on so many fronts. And it was just like, I wanted to text a lot of people about that.
Really?
Yeah.
And do you think that they would be just as excited to watch it, you think?
Yeah, I think we'll get into the stuff with like my family stuff, but like I did text my dad, who is very up to date on everything going on there, to an absurd level, and I'm sure he's aware of Nour, but I don't know what his opinion is of her. But it was just like, you need to watch this, Dad.
Right.
You need to watch this.
She's really charming. So even if you have any preconceived notions about her, I think she wins you over in the documentary.
Yeah, and I think one thing we'll talk about my show in a little bit, but I don't really get into my dad's politics too much, but I know he's someone like who I think is a little more, he's more left-wing than he lets on, but I don't think he, and just for context, my dad is a professor of Jewish history at Columbia University, which is very interesting year and a half this man has had.
To say the least.
Very interesting year.
Yeah.
So he's, and it's a lot of complications of why he isn't as vocal as he wants to be. And there's part of me that's like, well, Dad, you created a monster. So I'm here to express my point of view. And so I don't know.
You created a monster, but from his eyes, it's a monster.
I wouldn't call it a monster. It's more just like, I love my dad to death. And I want to, like, every time I talk about him, I want to be clear. I love my dad to death. He is a wonderful human being. He went above and beyond for me, and he loves me just as equally. But there's a little bit of, he's a man in sort of a more prominent position than I am and on this front, and he knows more than I ever will. And I love him. And there's part of me that's like, Dad, you got to be more vocal about this.
Right.
But it's complicated. And like, it's also family dynamics. It's not even so much, because there's a lot of people in my family who don't feel this way. Most of my family is, I would describe as a lost cause on this issue to some extent.
Really?
I have like 2 cousins I trust. I have, and the people in my family who are more aligned with me are scared. And there's a lot of people who are left-wing in the Jewish community who are like, if I say this, I'm going to alienate half my friends and family.
Right.
And at least half. And it's part of me was, that was me for a while, honestly. That
it must be a lonely place to be.
Yeah. And I've talked to a few people about this who had a similar journey, and they're like, it is designed systematically. Like, I've talked to rabbis about this who have been like, it is systematically designed to make you feel isolated in this. So, I mean, I've only been to Israel once in my life. I don't have, and I talk about in the show, it was like it didn't hit with me the way it's supposed to hit with other people. But, so when I talk about this issue, and I guess we're getting right into it, but it is like, sorry, I don't mean
please.
More lead-in.
Let's go where the conversation leads us.
Yeah. So part of me was just like, I don't really have much emotional attachment to it personally. And that was, I feel like when I was visiting when I was 11, everyone in my family has been back multiple times. I have not. But I don't have, I have a connection to being raised in a very Jewish community, and it was a reformed conservative community. It was left wing with one exception. I always
Can you tell people what reform means? Because I think I know, because I've read a bit, but some people might not.
So in Judaism, there's 3 sort of main branches. There's reform, which is the more modern, like, open-minded, isn't as strict as some other forms. There's Orthodox, which a lot of people know, which is very strict, always, kosher keeping, don't touch money, don't drive the car on Shabbat, Saturday. So it's like that. Conservative sort of in the middle. There's
conservatives in the middle.
Kind of, yeah. Okay. It's sort of it's a sort of a struggle between like the modern and the past in a lot of ways. It's a lot of people. I was raised more conservative, though I went to a reform school, synagogue and Jewish day school when I was growing up. So, but I was raised in conservative Judaism, and that's why when you hear people talk about Israel, it's always like you say right wing instead of conservative, because conservative means other things in Judaism than it does in.
That's an important distinction, I think, for people.
So I think when people, and I think it leads to a lot of confusion, honestly, when they hear that. But there's also the concept of conservadox, which is people who are sort of between conservative and Orthodox. I only know that from the month I was on JDate 12 years ago.
We have a similar thing on Muzzmatch.
Yeah.
Where you have to list like how religious you are, but we're not as creative with the names as JDate is.
Yeah. No, it was, I was raised in like I said, it was a community that voted like probably 90% Democratic in America. But they would not, if you talk about this issue, there's a twist that happens, and that's in the community. And it's something I've always struggled with. It's just like everything but this issue. You're where most people in the left-wing community would want you to be. And then there's just a twist here. It's very interesting that this twist happens here. And it's something I've struggled with, and I don't really talk that much about what's happening in Israel and Palestine because I don't claim to know a lot about it. Like, I know what I know, but part of what I've learned more over the years, and I probably know more than I think I do, but what I've learned over the years has been the Jewish perspective and the Israeli perspective. And I really was not raised with any kind of Palestinian perspective. And that's only come on my own since October 7th. And it was just, I did not hear the word Nakba until April 2024.
Really?
I never heard that word. And my dad's a Jewish history professor. I went to Hebrew school for 8 years, between Jewish day school and that. I went to great schools. I went to like an elite high school and an elite university. And that word and concept, I knew there was some kind of like displacement and it was fucked up, but I didn't realize, hey, that's a full-blown ethnic cleansing that happened there. And that was my anger about this is not so much, from my perspective, that's horrible. That's an awful thing. But what really pisses me off is how did I not know about this? Right. And that's what like my issue that I want to address on this subject is. And that's what I'm doing with the show is like, how do we make this more common knowledge that among the Jewish community than it is? And
is that what drove you to use your art and your comedy to come up with Jew Interrupted?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, there was I have a background in stand-up. I've done stand-up for 15 years at this point, and it was the kind of thing where it was like right after October 7th, like a month or two after I visited some family. And there was like a moment, I won't get into it too much because it is very sensitive. And like, it was just like a situation where like, if I were to do a stand-up joke about this, it would be funny, it would be kind of crass, but it would also like mean like certain family members would never speak to me again if I told the joke this way. And I just had this thought, like, even if this were one joke and it would hit, it doesn't get the full context of everything I've been going through. And it would be like the perspective and everything that led me to have like sort of the dark humor that I had and thought of in that moment. Like I ran that joke by people and they're like, that is like that kind of joke.
Yeah.
And I could have done it, but I was just like, I need more depth than that. Like that's one joke that sort of it could be a throwaway and it would piss off a lot of people in my life who are important to me. Or I could do like a full-blown explanation of everything where this is coming from. And that's not something, it's also like, I feel like for the first like decade or so to stand up, I was sort of dancing around my background in a lot of ways where I do jokes and then, I did very well in my field, but I never really got to like where that's coming from. Like I did a lot of jokes about Judaism and I have like a joke in my stand up about Israel and the perspective on it, but I never really got into like the weeds of my background, my family, and like where I come from. And, my dad is that professor. My grandfather was, on my mom's side, was like was the first Jewish Democrat elected in Brookline, Massachusetts, into the state representative there. And Brookline, if you know anything about American politics or Massachusetts politics, it's the bluest of blue. Like it's the most democratic of democratic cities and the most democratic state in the U.S. And it's an overwhelmingly Jewish community. There had never been a Democrat elected there before my grandfather. And he was extremely left-wing even for his time. Like he was one of the only people in the Massachusetts State House to decry McCarthyism and like back then. And he had like an incredible left-wing pedigree. Like he was just a warrior for the left and he was very Zionist. And
really?
He was also like the kindest man you ever met. Like everyone's like, every kindness, every like joyous, happy, like treats people with respect kind of thing in my life comes from him. And it's something I've had to reconcile. Again, it's like so much in my life is left wing with one exception.
Right.
And that's like, what do I do with that? And that's, and I think part of what drove me to this show is like, and really what I've struggled with a lot, not just in the show, but in my life, is how can I have this family that is so kind, so wonderful, like light of my life, like giving me everything, every advantage and every like care that I could possibly ask for and more. And then there's this thing that they don't have for the world and a group of people who are being completely destroyed right now. And that's really what I struggle with. And like, that's what drove me to do the show is like, 'cause I also know I'm not alone among Jews
Yes.
like this. I know there's a lot of Jews who feel this way. And it's also like, and it could be the thing where, oh, that's the culture. But I was also raised deep in the religion itself. And you go to most synagogues, and it's not just ultra-Orthodox or Orthodox synagogues, it's Reform and Conservative. They'll sing Hatikva like regularly.
What's Hatikva?
That's the Israeli national anthem.
Oh, in the synagogue.
In the synagogue. And I learned about the Israeli Independence Day, which is Yom HaAtzmaut in Jewish, and in Jewish, that was what I was raised with in like religious school. That day is the same day they honor the Nakba in Palestinian culture.
Yes.
And that, never heard that. Like I said, never heard that word, never heard that perspective.
Yeah.
And, it's something where, like, I've talked to my sister about this a lot. She had that perspective presented to her, and so it's not completely unheard of to hear that, but it's always like, okay, we'll give you this for a day, and then we'll talk about this stuff for the rest of your Hebrew school education.
Right.
So it's something I really struggle with, and I feel like I'm talking too much.
No, I love it.
But it's the kind of thing where one of the things that in a lot of aspects of my life, not just this issue, is like, if you call out this kind of stuff in Jewish culture, there's a lot of like, it's bad for the Jews to talk about this.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, I'm very concerned about anti-Semitism. I'm extremely concerned about this. But if this needs to be called out, wouldn't you rather a Jew do this than someone else?
Right. This brings me to you so kindly sent me a link to the show Jew Interrupted, which I immensely enjoyed watching.
Thank you.
I told you before we started recording how it was, for those of you you have to go watch the show. It's incredible. It packs a punch. It's really funny, but it also is very good at delivering the message that you intended to deliver. And one of the things that struck me was in the beginning of the show, you mentioned that growing up, you were actually more scared of being called a self-hating Jew than having someone say something anti-Semitic to you.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's by no means a universal Jewish experience. Like, there's, if you are raised in not New York, or even like the part of New York I was raised up in, the Upper West Side of Manhattan, that is, I wouldn't say that's universal. Like, I've had friends who've had like horrible anti-Semitic things if they were, a lone Jew in their community. Like, I have a friend who had pennies thrown at him as a kid. I have a friend who had a swastika drawn on his face when he passed out one night. And
disgusting.
yeah, it's absolutely disgusting behavior. These are friends of mine who have similar politics and things like that, but that's happened to them. For me, like, I grew up in a world that was an overwhelmingly Jewish community. It really, until I went to a public high school, I went to Jewish schools mostly until I went to high school. I knew very few non-Jews in the world I was raised in.
Right.
It was always like I would encounter, it's New York, you meet a little bit of everyone, but like the people I knew were overwhelmingly Jewish. I'd probably say like until I was 15, I'd say like at least 70 or 80% of the people I considered people I knew were Jewish, at least.
Right.
And when you're in that kind of bubble, like I'd heard people call it self-hating Jews, Shanda, even capo, which is a really fucked up word. If you don't know what that means, that's the term that used by Jews who aided the Nazis in the Holocaust. I've been called a capo online in the last like year when I started talking about this, dozens, if not hundreds of times.
How does that make you feel?
I hate it, but it's also, I think a lot of it was I hate hearing that, but at the same time, I'd rather be called that than be silent.
Wow.
That's sort of the way I'd feel about it. Is like, for years I was like, I run the risk of being called this, and it hurts every time I'm called that. And like that, like I've never been called. I've been like online and like Xbox Live, I've been called anti-Semitic slurs, that kind of thing, or whatever. It's like that kind of thing. I've never dealt with like, just because of the bubble I was raised in. I was taught anti-Semitism is a horrible thing. I never personally experienced it. I've had people say shitty things about me that I heard about later on that I didn't know about. But like, if you're in that bubble and you grow up in that, it can be, that word hurts. Being called a capo, a self-hating Jew, a shanda, which means an embarrassment for the Jew. Like those words hurt a lot. And like I know a lot of like anti-Zionist Jews who are using that about Zionist Jews, and I understand that this is like a, you know, I'm on their side, but I can't bring myself to use those words to describe anyone, just because to me those are some of the hurtful things that have ever been said to me personally.
Wow, that's incredible. I think it shows the depth of your emotion and how much those words mean to you, that you would not, you know, put a mirror up or accuse someone of doing that.
Because my main point is like, you can't tell someone how they have to be a Jew. If they're Jewish, like,
yes,
like there's, you know, like with any, you know, minority group or subset of, you know, whatever ethnic line, there's a lot of diversity of opinion. Like it took me a while, for instance, to learn, like, you know, I hang out with Black comics all the time, and it wasn't until like a while ago that like seeing Black comics disagree, or, you know, my Black friends in general saying like, hey, we don't agree on this. And like within minority groups, there's always a diversity of opinion, especially, not to stereotype, but Jews tend to yell at each other a lot, even with love. But that is a little bit of a stereotype, but it's been my personal experience. So take with that what you will. But that's not unique to Jews by any stretch of the imagination.
No, Arabs, we yell a lot too. Yeah. We could have a yelling match. Maybe.
Yeah, but it's just something where, you know, understanding that there's no one right or wrong way to be a Jew.
Right.
That's something where I don't like, you know, as much as I am critical of the parts of the community that say I have to be a certain way, I don't want to tell them how to be a certain way too.
Right.
I just want them to be fucking empathetic. And that's really what it is.
What was the moment? I know you said that you hadn't heard of the Nakba until April 2024. Was there a piece of information, or what was your journey in learning about the other, you know, the other side of the story? Yeah. Could you tell us about that? Yeah,
I mean, when October 7th happened, I talk about it a lot in the show, but I was, you know, as someone who was not religious, who had a lot of trauma with my, you know, inside the Jewish community, and a lot of, you know, sort of rejected it for a large part of my life. It hurt me. Like, it really was devastating. I called my dad. I'm like, why am I so hurt by this? And I don't know. And, you know, I got, you know, people online, some of them are smarter than others. And I would hear takes that I thought I knew everything. Like, I thought because I've had my education and, you know, even that before October 7th, I'd call myself I don't know if I would have called myself anti-Zionist, but my politics were that. And, I was very much like anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are not the same thing. That's always been a part of my agenda and always will.
Why is that? Maybe because of your upbringing with your father being a professor and having you critically think about things?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of complicated feelings there. And I knew some of my dad's positions. I knew some of his. I never read any of his books until I read his like introductory book on Zionism after October 7th. So and a lot of it I had heard, but it was like very propagandized what I'd heard, and he was more academic and neutral about it by his standards. But I was always someone who was like, and I really liked the journey that happened in the documentary, because it was like pro-Israel, pro-peace was sort of what I would call myself, like about coexistence and reconciliation. And then I remember seeing after October 7th, I like see so many takes. I'm like, this is dumb. I muted like 50 people of all sides, that kind of thing. It's just because I'm like, it wasn't even I was offended. I was just like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And then like eventually, like any self-respecting millennial, like, hey, got back on the social media apps, and I started listening to perspectives I hadn't heard. And it's embarrassing. So it
was social media.
It really was. And it's embarrassing. So social media is
it's not embarrassing.
I know, and it just feels like that's how I learned. Like, you know, I've read more on it since, and there's like, but just like, and to be fair, like what's been happening since October 7th was happening before that in Gaza and the West Bank. It's definitely heightened. And so seeing just how heightened it is has been pretty devastating. But then, you know, you read some opinions that you haven't heard before, and you go back and you're like, this is a heightening of something that's been consistent for almost, 80 years at this point.
Yes.
And that's just, and so like, in my mind, like, the problem was Netanyahu, and like before that, it was Ariel Sharon, and like
Right.
I remember when Rabin was assassinated and how devastating that was, and I was like, oh, that in my mind, I was like, oh, we were doing good. Israel was doing good, and then the Rabin assassination happened, and then the right wing
Kahanists
and stuff like that. So I was like, it was like sort of like what's happened in America. Like it's the right wing fascist forces have taken over, but like a lot of Americans have realized this has always sort of been part of our history, and I feel like that's heightened. Like what's happened in Israel has always been that, and it's recent, and that's what's so frustrating about that. It's like,
but it's been hidden.
That's the part that pisses me off so much, and that's the part where if I do any kind of advocacy, like I try to really be focused in my advocacy. There's people doing incredible work in terms of the politics of it, like what's happening and pressuring Congress and things like that. Like that's great, and that's a really necessary thing. I feel like what I do with my show and what I talk about and what I feel like I need to be candid about is how Jews talk about this amongst each other and how they educate ourselves amongst each other. That's really my wheelhouse because I experienced that. That was my life, was just having this stuff left out and pretty much systematically. And that's the part that's really become my focus in a lot of ways.
This brings me to a question about you mentioning kind of the same level of anger after watching a different documentary, which was No Other Land.
Yes.
You said that you also felt angry about that. Where is consuming art a way for you, because you're making art about this, is consuming art about this topic also helpful in you processing your feelings about it?
Yeah, I mean, when I saw No Other Land, I was like, I got kind of like very depressed after that. And like, that's a documentary. And so it's the kind of thing where like by the point I'd seen that, I had sort of, I went like an awareness that I hadn't had before, but all I could think about this is like everything the Israeli government does in that documentary does not make me safer as a Jew. Like it does not. It's like, if you are in the West Bank and this is the only Jews you know, of course you're going to fucking do what you can to defend yourself. Like, of course you are, because this is fucking brutal. And I think that's why documentary and art has that power. And I hope movie's gotten some distribution in the U.S. There's been a lot of roadblocks, even though it won the best documentary Oscar. But I really, it's an essential viewing for me, just because it really humanizes something that's sort of seen as an abstract issue by everyone except those experiencing it in a lot of ways.
Right.
The other documentary that I love, which is sort of a video that's blew up in a way that I didn't even expect it to, when I did with the makers of the documentary film Israelism.
Yes, and that's how we actually connected.
Yeah, which was, I heard of, and then I saw it. I watched it with my wife, and was raised in who's not Jewish, but she was raised among a lot of Jews, but she was not like raised with Judaism. And she was watching this, and she was like, Jesus Christ! And for me, it was just like, thank God someone's talking about this. Thank God because that was really the only other movie I've seen. And the filmmakers I've talked to, they're incredible people. And it's just like, it's really the only other thing I've seen that addresses like just how deeply this is ingrained in every level of Jewish experience, from preschool through high school and through Hebrew school, through college, through birthright and everything. And it's just like, it's a part of like, you can't, and I'm someone who's like I said, there's no right or wrong way to be a Jew, just be an empathetic human being. And part of what I was raised to believe Judaism was just, you fight for social good, you fight for a better world, and you do what you can, and you discuss what makes a better world. To see those conversations shut down it seems like a betrayal of everything I was raised with, but it's also consistent with everything I was raised with. So it's just a contradiction, and something I even with the show, and even the show is like an outlet for that. But it's one of the things I talk about in the show is no matter what we do, it's not enough.
Right.
But
action is needed.
Yeah, exactly.
You structured your show into 7 segments. I was wondering if you could tell us more about the creative process behind writing it.
Yeah, and some of I've done storytelling shows. I've been on The Moth and stuff like that before. I've done, not on the radio show, but I've been on the live show and multiple times in Los Angeles and New York and even Chicago. And so I have familiar with like that sort of format of storytelling. There's a lot of
So you were already experienced in storytelling.
Yeah, specifically in addition to stand-up,
which is not a skill a lot of stand-ups have. Yeah.
Well, I've been to many a storytelling mic where stand-ups show up and they're like, "Wait, what is this?" And they're like, "Well, here's what I ate for breakfast today. I guess I got to make that funny." And it's just, but what I like about storytelling is that it gives you sort of as opposed to stand up, is it gives you sort of a structure and it's personal. But even then I struggled with that. And I told one of the story, I tell one story in the show about when I visited Israel for the first and only time in my life when I was 11. And I have a story in that. And I told that at the Moth, and crickets, absolute crickets, stares, like sort of a veneer. It's a very like NPR-ish crowd. And like, it was just an eye-opening experience. Just like,
why were there crickets?
I mean, there were laughs and people were laughing, but like the stares I got afterwards, just because I think there were a lot of people who didn't like the politics of what I had to say in that story. And you've seen that. It's not necessarily that political a story.
Yeah, it was about how you went for chocolate. I don't want to reveal too much.
No, but it was a lot of it was just like understanding like the expectations I had when I visited Israel versus like my reality and sort of the lack of connection I felt when I was there. And there was like a line at the end that was like, I don't want atrocities committed in my name. And I think that irked people in a lot of ways.
Oh, so they were actually more, they were less open-minded than you would hope they would be, even as an NPR crowd.
Even as an NPR crowd. But there was part of me that like, so I have familiar, just to go back to your question, I have familiar with that format and I have familiarity with that story. And I was just, and I'd seen a lot of storytellers, like one-person shows like that. Like I'm sitting down through the show, which I did sort of to like get myself out of stand-up mode, because like I'm wired when I'm on stage standing up to be in stand-up mode. So it's like sitting down at a table with a bottle of water, and that's it. There's a very wonderful storyteller who was very influential to me. I'd see Mike Daisy, who's like a sort of known storyteller. I saw him right out of college when I was still more interested in pursuing theater than I am now. And that was sort of the format he had. I later like know him and like have become, sort of friends with him. And I met a lot of great friends through him, a lot of them who came to the show. And so that was the format that made sense to me. If I'm doing like a show that's both personal and political and through storytelling, that format made sense to me. So sort of breaking it down that way, and instead of having it be like a monologue, an hour-long monologue, or just a rant or something like that. It just made sense to break it down and give the audience room to breathe as well.
Okay. And you also incorporated a lot of media.
Yeah.
Very personal media.
Yeah.
Did that make it harder for you to write the show or to portray it because you were revealing such a personal side of yourself and your upbringing?
I think if I didn't express just how much like love I had for my family and how much I love them and how much they love me and how close those ties are, then it would just be like, I don't think the show would have worked. I don't like, for me to include that shows like the contrast of the sweetness of our our familial relationships with what's going on outside of us is sort of the struggle I'm dealing with. And I don't think I would have been able to do the show if I didn't have such a good relationship with my parents, if I didn't respect them and love them so much. And, there's some things in the show they probably wouldn't like, but, I can do the show because they love me and I love them. And that's, impossible to change because we're so connected.
How would you feel if they were in the audience watching you?
I mean, I feel like they're going to see it at some point. I know there'd be things they didn't like that would be hard for them to see, but also, they may listen to this episode. I don't know. They may watch it, but it's the kind of thing where, the show is dedicated to them in a lot of ways. Like the first line of the show is, this is dedicated to my family. And I really want them to understand that this is coming from a place of love and respect. And this is just an area where I have struggled with, and I don't really have any answers for how this divide in this one, it's just like in of the things we've gone through, it's just like one thing, but it's a thing that is like beyond my family times 100,000.
And that's why it was so important for you to talk about it, because it's beyond us as people. It's more about the system. And we can't change the system unless we start talking to each other about it.
Exactly. And I think like my family will never like cut me off in any way. I don't see that ever happening. I've been scared about like, what if they saw the show and are like, we hate this, Ethan, you can't do the show again. But I'm like, even if I didn't have that wonderful relationship with them, even if I was doing like my family sucks, here's why show, which I would never do. But even if like this show, killed our relationship, which again, I want to say it will never do, this issue is still happening. And so what's happening in the world is still there regardless of how wonderful things are with my family.
Yes. And if your parents are listening, like I have a lot of Jewish friends who have been asking themselves questions and feel in a lot of ways similar to how you feel, but they're not able to talk to their families because they don't have that solid relationship, that
Yeah.
foundation that's based on love and trust.
Yeah.
And so they're scared to get into these fights that might damage their relationships. And I actually think it's a testimony to how much you love them and that support that you've gotten from them that you're able to talk about it.
Yeah. And it's like, if I had any, like a degree less of a great relationship with my family, I wouldn't be able to do this show.
Yeah.
If this, and I like, there are people in my life who've come up and said, I wish I could do something like this. I wish I
Wow.
could have these conversations. And those are like, you know, it's, I get very self-conscious of like, you know, I promote the show, I charge money for it. I give a chunk of the money to, if not now, but there is part of me that's like, is this, I don't like promoting myself. And I'm like, but it's also like this, this is what we have to do. We live in the society we live in, but B, like, I'm not doing the show to like make myself known in Hollywood or whatever the fuck that means. It's just like, I'm doing the show because I know there's other Jews out there like me who've had similar experiences, who can relate to a lot of things. And there's people who came to the show and said like, who aren't even Jewish. And they're like, there was tons for me to relate to and get in that show. And like, I just want to help them. And if you're listening to this and you're Jewish and you're like, what the fuck is this? Like, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Like, there's been so much struggle. So many Jewish families have been torn apart by this and throughout the last 70 years, but especially in the last year and a half.
Yeah.
And it's devastating to see. And but like I said, no matter how devastating things that happen to Jewish families right now, we're alive.
Yes.
That's not the case for so many people, Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank and Lebanon and everywhere else.
That's true.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think you saying that is exactly why we wanted to start this podcast. We wanted to showcase people who are using their art as a tool of resistance and change. And it has nothing to do with the capitalist business side of show business, right? It's about people using their humanity through their art. And that's why I reached out to you, because you made a testimony through the Israelism social media account, which is an incredible film. Like you said, I recommend everyone to watch it. And I just felt your strength, your courage, your honesty, your vulnerability through that testimony. And that's why I was like, oh, you're a fellow comedian and I want to know you.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, as well, in the arts, there are a lot of comedians who don't necessarily stand for anything, and not in a like, sometimes, yeah, if you just want to write jokes about whatever, you're welcome to, but some people just don't have a moral compass and will go to the right or platform fascists just because it's the cool thing to do.
Yeah. The number of people who are like, okay, I don't agree with them, but let's put them on our show anyway. It's infuriating to me.
Yes,
and
me too.
It happens everywhere. It's not, I think in LA it's probably more pronounced just because there's so much entertainment industry there.
Yes.
I saw that in New York. I've seen that in Chicago. I've seen that pretty much everywhere I've done comedy. I've done comedy in South Africa. I've seen it there. So yeah.
Wow.
So, and I've done it in Indiana. So, but what I do love about stand-up and what I love about comedy is there is sort of a universal language to it. Yes. Like I meet comics from anywhere in the world, anyone who does stand-up, and there's like a language you can talk about. We can all talk about shitty shows we've done. We can all talk about, does this joke work? What's this booker like? What do you think of this comedian? Like, It's really like, that's what I love about it. I love the craft. I love the camaraderie between comedians. So when you get into the business, that's when I'm like, is this what I want to devote my life to? And I'm sure like I'm closing doors in LA by talking about this. I know I am. In fact, I've had like people I know with strong industry connections, like say fuck you to me on like people who are friends of mine. Like I've had to like cut off some friends who are pretty well connected. And it's, but I'm still going to do it. Like, hopefully I find, I can find an audience, and I think I have probably more with this. I've got more likes, and like when I did this video, my Instagram followers tripled overnight. And that's by striking a chord. And, LA is so obsessed with like, how many Instagram followers do you have? Mm-hmm. Can we book you if you have less than X amount of Instagram followers? So like, the goal isn't to promote myself, but just but like with anything in comedy, I feel like anyone, when they speak their truth and they talk about themselves and what their experience is, it's a better experience for audiences. It's a better experience for the comedians. It's just, it may, whatever happens in the industry, like I'm more happy with my art now than I've ever been.
Yes.
Because I'm being honest about my background and my experience. I think because like my background was a little more privileged than most people. Like I definitely was raised in an upper middle class family. Like, but my family still probably thinks they're middle class because we were probably top 1%, but we weren't top 0.0001%, which a lot of people in our world were.
Right.
I think because of that,
only one of your parents was a lawyer.
Yeah, only
as you
one.
say in your show.
Yeah. And it was just it was something where like I was ashamed of that to some extent because I'm whatever extent I'm a class warrior. It was just like, oh, I don't like where I'm come from, and so I hid that from myself. And like, but I had my troubles, and I talk about that a lot in the show with mental health and some of the culture I was raised in, how that contributed and made things sort of worse growing up with my mental health and struggles with that, and how it was sort of tied into the politics of the world in a lot of ways, and just feeling like an outsider in my own community. Like that was a lot of the struggle. And so like, it's not like I didn't have struggles. I wasn't like starving, which I know, which is like a lot of people in my world are. So, but I always like, I think I was like, well, I wasn't starving. So clearly I didn't have any real problems. And then it's just like, so I didn't like talking about my background. And then, I've grown up a little bit and I'm like, there is interesting stuff in my background. Not everyone in the world has a Jewish history, a father who's a Jewish history professor at Columbia. That is a unique experience of mine that if I explore that, however, to whatever extent I explore that, I can be like happier and I can be more creative and more true to myself while I am creative. So,
because you're looking inwards.
Yeah.
You're not ashamed of any pieces of yourself or your past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a lot of things in my life, outside of my art have sort of led me to the point where I can be this way. But when you're a 23-year-old open micer and you're like, oh, I want to do jokes about like whatever. It's just like
you're just like, laugh at me, please.
Laugh at me, please. Yeah, exactly. And I think I'm, the journey I've gone on, however long it took, I'm still relatively young. So it's just, I'm not, but I'm, I've been doing this 15 years. So there's been a part of me that's like, I've been doing this 15 years. I'm not on like Conan or whatever, who's not even on the air anymore. But you know what I mean? But it's just like,
Letterman won't book me.
Yeah, exactly. Jay Leno, what is he doing?
Where are you?
And, when I start, as a lot of comedians have this experience, but like, I literally had a therapist when I was like just starting comedy say, why don't you just call Jay Leno and send him some jokes? Like, just send him some jokes. He'll get you on the show. And it's just like, I don't understand where that comes from. It's probably some like generational thing, but whatever. But like, anyway, it's just like, my career, I'm doing a show at like a small theater, but it's just like, I'm having more fun with comedy and I'm having more recognition and success, whatever level scale I am than I've ever had before, just by being honest to myself.
Right. I definitely relate to those feelings of losing opportunities, especially around, I would say late 2023, November, December. Speaking out at that time was almost like, I want to say forbidden.
Yeah.
There was one narrative and you couldn't really stray from it.
Yeah.
But because I had been born and raised in Jordan.
Yeah.
And, going back to something you said about how, if all you've ever seen if the only face of Judaism you've seen is the occupation in the West Bank, then you're going to have a different view of Judaism. And that had been my experience. All I had ever seen of Judaism was the occupation of the West Bank. It wasn't until I went to McGill and made friends with a Jewish person, like two girls on my res floor who were lovely. I'm still friends with them till today. Well, friendly, you lose touch, but we're still friends on Instagram. It was my first time meeting a Jewish person and who didn't have a rifle, and
absolutely.
It's what you're doing is you're breaking down barriers and, it's hard because like we're going to get repercussions for this, but like you said, we have to stay true to what feels right within us.
Yeah.
And we will creatively be rewarded by having people in the audience who agree with us.
Yeah.
Like I'm okay losing an opportunity if it means sitting in a room working on jokes or being booked or sharing the stage with someone who thinks it's okay to wipe out 40,000 people in a year and a half.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. And it's just what you said just makes me so much, because I never met anyone who was Muslim until high school. And I went to a public high school. And, I'd had a lot of complicated feelings about my Judaism and my experience with that beforehand. But I went in and was just like, okay, you're fine. You're fine. Like, I have no problem with you. And like, I just, and it was, around 9/11 too. So there was a lot, like, that's when around the time I first met any Muslim was around 9/11. And that sort of transcended just the Jewish experience. It became like, there was a lot of issues before, but like, that's when America's relationship with Muslims took a turn, was 9/11. And I was meeting Muslims for the first time in high school. I went to a very diverse high school. And it was just like, and I didn't really know that many, but they were just like freaking high school kids, like any other high school kid. Right. And I was just like, you're not trying to kill me. I was told my whole life that Muslims want to kill me. Mm-hmm. And like, we're just getting lunch together. And like, we're just talking about bio and stuff like that. Right. It's just like,
And I was told all these anti-Semitic tropes or lies about Jewish people and how they were all evil and all they wanted was power. Yeah. And it's like, when we meet one-on-one, all that propaganda and hate dissipates.
Yeah. And one thing I like that really pisses me off is the alliance with the Christian right when it comes to Israel. Yeah. I feel like that needs to be addressed as part of this conversation. There's more Zionist, anti-Semite Christians in America than there are Jews in the world.
Really?
Period. 100%. 100%. There's parts in Revelations that say Jews need to be in Israel, so before the rapture happens, so they can all be killed. Like I'm sort of paraphrasing.
Before the Jews can be killed.
Before the Jews have to be killed as part of the steps toward the rapture. That is part of Revelations, and that's whether or not that's an interpretation that biblical scholars would say. That is an interpretation among Christian communities, which I would not have known unless I talked to Christians in college who met that. I didn't meet a thing as like a liberal Protestant until I was in college. And that's one of the things I addressed in the show is I thought every Protestant, because I grew up in New York, there was like a large Irish, Italian, like, Dominican, like Latin sort of Catholic community. I didn't meet any white Protestants until I went to college. And I'm like, wait, you're not a Bible thumping lunatic, but they like, okay, you're just, even when you're Christian, like you go to the, there's that's a section of it. But I would talk to them and they'd be like, oh yeah, this is something a lot of people believe.
And going back to something you said in your show that ties to this is some of the prayers use the words Yerushalayim and Yisrael, which are words for Jerusalem and Israel. Mm-hmm. But when you talked to your father, he mentioned that these were metaphors and not, literal references to geographic places. And so there's that level of awareness that can help you, what's the word? Contextualize. Yeah. Can we get more words? Differentiate.
Yeah.
Discern's a good one. Discern's a good one. You know what? For a room of immigrants, we're doing really well. We're doing really well with the adjectives. Yeah. So what advice or what would, if someone's questioning this, if someone who didn't have access to your father in the way that you did, what advice could you give them?
Yeah, what I will say is when the right wing talks about anti-Semitism, assume it's bullshit, like that kind of thing. That is, especially in America, like especially everything that's happening at universities in America, which is affecting my family directly and affecting a lot of Jewish families directly. I think there's more awareness now that the right wing is not your friend as a Jew, even though there's been a sense that we're protecting Jews. Like every bad faith argument the Republican Party has made in the U.S. has been about campus speech, has been in the name of combating anti-Semitism. But
there are Jewish students at the encampments. And even Mahmoud Khalil, he said that his liberation is tied to Jewish liberation. Yeah. So they are twisting students' words for their own agenda.
Yeah, and I think just assume if you're a Jew, the right wing is not your friend. That's
Right.
just, and if you're
Otherwise, they would criminalize and detain these neo-Nazi groups and these militias that are running around with guns.
yeah, and not just that, when the Jewish Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, is defending Elon Musk giving a Nazi salute,
Yes.
like, how is the mask not off at that point? Like, the mask could not be further off, but because he's an advocate for Israel, Jews will defend that. And that's...
So what do you think, how do people reconcile Elon being a defendant of Israel and him being anti-Semitic and, hiling?
It depends. I think what's happened since Trump took power has exposed a lot of things that I've known my whole life, that, like, to the mainstream in a lot of ways, that, like, I think there was a lot of backlash to the ADL in a way there never was before, both within and outside the Jewish community, after they made that statement, which said he got emotional when he was clearly Zig Heiling. And that is the group that is theoretically the mainstream institutional group combating anti-Semitism. They're not. They're not, and they've never been their friends. They've never been their friends. It's been an Israel front for my whole life, and going back before that. That's something I've known my whole life, and I've hated them. And even left-wing Jews have said, well, they're the only ones fighting for that. I'm like, they've never fought for us. They've been fighting for Israel, period.
Do you feel like organizations like If Not Now are more true to Jewish values and, Judaism than these mainstream organizations are?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I love If Not Now, and I love Jewish Voices for Peace, and I know there's independent Jewish voices here in Canada. I follow them on Instagram, and I keep up with the activities going on there. Like, these are in my mind, these are very important, necessary groups. They're political advocacy groups. It's not their job. I'm not blaming them, but what limits them is that they're not sort of as active in discussing what Judaism means now. Like, what does it mean to be a Jew, both on a spiritual, on a cultural, on a political, or like ethnic level? What does all that mean? Like, they're a political advocacy group. That's what they're there for. But I think there's what I've talked about in the show, when I've had like discussions with rabbis and other Jewish thinkers, not, outside of those organizations, is just, what does it mean to be Jewish now? Like, what can we do? How do we define ourselves now? Because in my mind, the idea of Judaism and Israel were like breaking apart from them, like, disassociating them. Like, they're so intertwined in most aspects of American and probably North American Jewish life that it's like, if you're going the mainstream route. So, but at the same time, by sort of coming to terms with my politics on this and sort of having the awakening I've had, like, I feel more connected to my Judaism than I ever have when I meet other Jews in like events at If Not Now or Jewish Voices for Peace, and I'm feeling not alone. Like, I can talk about Jewish stuff in a way and have it be part of my identity in a way it really never was before. Like, there's got to be a way to be Jewish and not have Israel be a part of that. And a lot of the institutions that have been defining what Judaism is in North America for the past decades, like before I was born, have failed. And I don't have any faith in them recovering that. So I've talked to me like, if we want to define what Judaism means now, it can't be tied to the institutions that have failed Jews and the world for decades. And that's a hard thing to hear, because like, how do you, if you're right, and it's also the kind of thing where like, if you have been raised to believe Israel is necessary and reflective of the Jewish experience your whole life, it's really hard to break that. Like, I don't, as frustrating as it is for certain, older members of my family to hear what they have to say, like, what are they going to believe? Like, their whole life has been a lie? Like, it has to some extent, but like, I don't want to say, hey, your whole life has been a lie. It's not going to get through. They have to come up with that discovery on their own. And I don't blame anyone over a certain age to say, hey, my whole life has been a lie.
Yeah.
And I struggled a lot with that. I'm in my 30s, and even that was hard for me.
Yeah. But
imagine if you're in your 70s and you're having to have those kind of reflections. Unless you're raised to believe you can have this, it's really hard to break that down. And especially, people can, the people rarely change their minds politically in general. This is a core issue, like a personal issue. Like, I think a lot of my family's like connection to Israel is tied to, previous generations of family members. Like, my grandfather is a big part of why, my mom and my aunts and other members of my family have so much connection to Israel. It's because he would go every year, and he was so devoted to it.
But don't you feel like there is a major shift in the younger generation?
There is, but there's also a lot of people who haven't shifted in the younger generations. Like I try to associate the people I know, and like because of the group, the advocacy and the involvement I've done, I'm happen to know more outside of my family, Jews who have similar mindsets to me. But it's not at all a popular necessarily opinion among Jews. I mean, it's growing, it's necessary to finally grow this way. But we're not all there yet, even among my generation, and I don't know if it's a generational thing. When the education is that entrenched,
yeah.
It's hard to break that out. But at the same time, even among Jews who are starting to feel the way I do, they're afraid to speak out, and they are right to do that. So, like, I understand why someone who's like, if I said this, my family wouldn't speak to me again. Why would you say that? And why would you be public about that?
Which is why you speaking out is so important, because hopefully they can message you, or they can find the courage in themselves to speak out like you did. I think what you're doing is so important.
Thank you.
And incredible.
And you've been so kind in reaching out to me and making this connection. Like this trip to Toronto was sort of an impromptu thing, and it was just like, what's going on in America? Let's
Why? What is going on?
Yeah,
in America?
It's fun. It's very fun.
Was okay.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
We're not capitulating
Super
at
Bowl
all.
was great, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No one got mad.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go Knicks. Anyway, but it is something that's very testy, and I really like it's. I'm glad that video that I made with the Israeli filmmakers has connected with so many people. I didn't know going into it. I was like, I don't know these people. They've reached out to me. They've been very nice, but are they going to twist my words? Are those things going to be interpreted? Are they going to use my family as like a prop? But they were so nice and so kind. I'm very grateful for. It's Erin Exelman, who's the main person I spoke with there. She's wonderful. And that video hit a chord, and I didn't know it would hit a chord as much as it did, but I really am humbled by the kind of response I got for that.
It definitely hit one for me as soon as I've said this to you before, but I felt like my soul, your soul and my soul kind of held hands through that video.
Yeah.
Where I was like, this is a person who's being honest, sharing his personal experience, telling the truth in a way that I know is really hard for him.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that.
No, and thank you for recognizing that. And everyone who reached out to me, and there's people who I haven't talked to in years recognize that. And I just want to say there's a lot of people who are starting to speak out. I feel like everyone who has the courage to speak out about this, you are like, it's incredible. Like, I'm not by any means the one person doing this. And like, there's comedians like Matt Lieb and things like that, who's the one who I've known for years. He's doing incredible work there. There's a lot of comics out there. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on a lot of them, but there's a lot of great comedians out there who are speaking up. Josh Gondelman's great. Ilana Glazer, Josh Gondelman, Hannah Einbender. Like
Hannah Einbender's speech was incredible.
And Eric Andre. Like a lot of comedians, Jewish comedians, have been speaking out about this. A lot of just Jewish celebrities in general have been speaking out about this. And then
Seth Rogen.
Yeah, and he and there's a lot who, even if they feel this way, are afraid to, which is understandable. And a lot of it is there's like, well, I don't want to upset half my audience, and I'm kind of, which is fine. Like, I guess it's just, what are your priorities?
What's the deal you made with the devil, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And if I can say, I'm Arab, and I can definitely see how Jewish voices are platformed a lot more openly, a lot more frequently than Arab, Palestinian, Muslim
100%,
voices.
yeah.
So it's almost like you're not the only one, but your voice, just by the system we're in, is going to be platformed more than a Palestinian person speaking. So
and I just want to say, like, the fact that Moammer has a show, the fact that Rami has a show, is like, that needs to happen more. Like, Lord knows there's been a long and distinguished and accomplished Jewish comedy history. It's been going on for the last 100, and it's even when it was like a minority perspective, more so than it is now. It's such a rich history, but it's been platformed. And I feel like even when I was doing like general Jewish jokes in stand up, be like, here's another Jewish joke and a Jewish boy doing Jew jokes in stand up, and that's it's like I'm sort of bored of it. Like even
Really?
like my joke before when I was doing jokes like making fun of Jewish stuff and not, I was like, we talk about this rich history of Jewish comedy. There's 3 Jewish jokes. We're cheap, we're neurotic, our mothers are crazy. Like that's every Jewish joke that's existed through history. So part of me was like, that's an oversimplification, but that was like the general theme of every Jewish joke that we've heard to some extent. So it was more interesting for me to like do jokes that were a little different about Judaism. But now I'm at a point where I'm like, this is where that different perspective is coming from. And it's important for me to give the full picture, not just do like a kind of joke.
Right.
But yeah.
And you know what's funny is that in comedy, I've befriended so many Jewish people, and you know, all this propaganda about us hating each other. Like my best friend is a Jewish comedian, you know, and my favorite, I love Gary Shandling. Like my biggest regret is I never got to meet him in real life. So it's like, especially in comedy, like we have so much in common.
Yeah. It's really, you know, like we talked about, comedy is a universal language. And like, you know, there's kind of things where being annoyed in religious school is a pretty common experience. Like that is pretty universal in a lot of ways.
Right.
And like, you know, there's a line I have in the program of the show that's one of my favorite short stories ever. I know he can be very problematic, but Philip Roth has a story, like a short story that I always come back to called The Conversion of the Jews, where it's basically, it's the classic story of someone in religious school questioning their elders and getting insane blowback and everything happening. Like if you're a Jewish person or not, it's an incredible work of literature. And there's the line I include in the program is like, he basically questions the rabbi and he gets sort of hit, the rabbi slaps him and he runs to the roof and everyone's going, it's just this chaotic scene and everything's going crazy. And like, as he's running to the roof after the rabbi slaps him, he's like, is it me? Is it me? And then like, as this chaotic thing unfolds, he's like, the question isn't me anymore. Is it us? And that line, like, I get emotional every time I think of that line. And that's in the program of the show is that line. So yeah.
Wow. And when is the show running again?
It will be if you're in Los Angeles, it will be on June 10th, June 22nd, and June 27th at the Broadwater Theater, the main stage in Hollywood. If you're not in LA or you're not able to make any of those times, I will be live streaming it on my Patreon. So it's $5 a month if you want to live stream it. That's hopefully that's acceptable. And all the 10% of all funds from the show and all from the Patreon go to If Not Now for their advocacy. I've made some incredible friends. Some of them came out to see the show. They endorsed the first version of the show, which was really an honor to have that happen. You can find, do the plugs, I guess. We'll do that.
Yes, please.
My Instagram and all my handles, except on the Nazi platform, the X platform, which I'm not on anymore.
Oh, good.
Not on Twitter anymore. That's the only thing I'll dead name is Twitter. But anyway, my handle on everything is Ethan Stan Comedy.
Stan Comedy.
You can find me on all those platforms. I'm still on Instagram, still on Threads, Blue Sky, and find me on there. This message reached out to you. I thank you for anyone who's listening, anyone who this resonates with, and I thank everyone for listening. And I thank you most of all, Nour, for being such an incredible, kind person who reached out and has made my Toronto experience so far.
That's so
sweet. I really
sweet.
appreciate it.
It's been such a blast hanging out the past 2 days, getting to know you, and having this incredibly thoughtful, moving, amazing conversation with you. It means so much to me. And so likewise, thank you.
Thank you so much, Nour. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Congratulations! You've been randomly selected to watch my comedy. That was my podcast, the Nour Hadidi Podcast. I'm Nour Hadidi. I'm a comedian. If you enjoyed that clip, please give us a follow. Subscribe to the podcast. It's available everywhere. And